This is great. We finally get together, Ryan, after first meeting at 100% Human. I can't remember if it was in New York or London, which one we met at. I'm not sure, but we met.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's good to
In
finally.
London, I think it was, and also through Unreasonable Group
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah,
So,
and our mutual friend and partner and just good-hearted guy, Ed Martin.
yeah.
You know, he's the best. So thanks for being here, and I'm excited to get started. How about if you would just briefly introduce yourself personally, maybe something that you've never told anybody in the world you want to announce now. I don't know. And what, yeah, and a little bit of, and who you are, what you do as well, but we'll get into that a little bit more. So you got the floor.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, Mark, for having me. My own introduction. So Ryan Shanks, I am living here and sitting in Dublin, Ireland at the moment. I live here with my wife and 13-year-old daughter. I'm originally, though, from small town, Central Illinois, first generation college student. I went to college in Chicago, studied political science communication, had a brief stint in the world of politics, and decided it wasn't exactly for me, and managed in an interview with Anderson Consulting to convince some recruiters that politics and organization change were similar bedfellows, and I managed to get hired in 1997 into the company Anderson Consulting, which is nowadays known as Accenture, which I'm still a part of. I've been working then in the area of change and innovation for about 25 years, with a particular focus on the people dynamic. And I would say that's individual coaching, organization development, and increasingly in recent years, it's a society at large and the kind of the social effects and interactions with business. I left the US around the year 2000. I had a client, Ericsson, who took me to Sweden, and I moved there permanently, was based there for about 8 years or so. And while in Sweden, got an international relations degree, master's, and also met my Irish wife. And I had my Irish daughter in Stockholm, actually. And when she was 8 months old, that's when we moved here to Dublin. That was back in 2008. So my current job is...
Sorry, yeah. So you mean the accent didn't come from the States, obviously?
Well, it originated there, but you know, it's a funny, you know, sometimes when I kick off these things, I have to explain my accent a bit, but obviously it seems normal to me. But one of the things I committed to when I went to Sweden was to learn Swedish. And in some ways, since they're so good at English, I had to really almost try to forget English and just focus on Swedish. And then I met my Irish wife. And so as I reintegrated in English language again, I don't know, it's mismatched everything up. So apologies if it's...
No, it's actually good.
Yeah.
So you're actually, before we go even a little bit further, you know, I always like Simon Sinek's why, but share with us why really do you do what you do?
Why I do what I do. So what I do, and maybe I'll just highlight it and then say why, is so I run Accenture's global R&D and innovation capabilities in its center that is based in Dublin. And so I spend my time between applied research, working with clients, let's say Fortune 500 companies, executive teams in the world of innovation. And I also incubate new products and services for Accenture itself, which is going through its own level of change that's required. And we work on projects from pharma R&D to innovations in policing to sustainability, and quite a rich amount of areas. So my why, that was your question there. One thing that gets me up in the morning, I would say, is learning. This job in the world of innovation and doing it from a vantage point of a professional services company means I have the opportunity to interact with so many different companies and so many different geographies around the world. And I have an insatiable appetite for learning. And I think that is one of the things that drives me. I think that the second is I'd probably say impact. I nearly say service. I see Accenture, quite honestly, and the doc as a platform on which to make the world a better place. I thought that was politics many years ago when I started in the world, and it was the most direct route that perhaps I thought it would have been. And in some ways, I found the world of business, both serving individual clients like humans and individuals and teams and seeing them thrive better, but also trying to square the circle of some of these more intractable questions we're facing today. I find hugely meaningful. And probably finally, the why is the people. I am, at the end of the day, I enjoy the opportunity to build teams and see other people successful, and and so I think that fuels me as well, working with great people within a culture and in the ecosystem more broadly.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, because I got my CPA and I never wanted to be an accountant. The trouble is, I was really good at it, and so I had to figure out a way to not be so good. And so they would and Deloitte, we talk about influencers. One of the Deloitte partners saw that and said, "You're doing a great job on this, but I can tell you want something else. You want more." And it's a little bit of a good segue there, because it's taken decades for leaders to realize that if you align your corporate purpose, your brand with impact, it's actually really good for business, and it's definitely good to attracting the very best people who want to make money and make a difference at the same time. So taking into account your different experiences with talent, with innovative change, the education you talked about, how early did you begin to see yourself as, if you will, somebody that wanted to be a leader who cares about making impact?
Mm-hmm. I think you probably heard it. There's some sort of drive to make impact that I've had for a while, which is what initially took me into, let's say, my original studies. And to be honest, I think I was influenced as well a bit living in small town America. I was an Eagle Scout. I was, there's a certain level of values and, being trustworthy, some sense of duty, some sense of stewardship. Some of that was, I credit my parents and community, I guess, to some extent, in terms of instilling some of those things quite early on. In the business world, over, let's say, my 25 years career in business, I dabbled quite a lot in, a pro bono project with Save the Children, or with a variety of different corporate social responsibility sort of endeavors, partly as an outlet, as well for what I was doing. And that was great. And I was one of those people, as you mentioned, that stayed with the company because it gave me those opportunities and so forth to be able to stay. So I'm a beneficiary of that. I think though the leader who cares discussion, and maybe something more recent, is I think it's, sometimes they say it's easy to be a leader when you're in the midst of an obvious win-win. But I don't think it's always obvious. And for instance, the doc, which I'm running now, working with our team, we have about 250 or so folks, and we came up with this concept around our purpose of pioneering conscientious innovation. That was 4 years ago. And the idea there is that everything we do, I don't do AI for good. I don't have a portfolio of the stuff for society and social innovation, because I don't have a separate book of business which is about unbridled profiteering, right? The question is, everything we do should try to square those circles. And in order to do that, we insist that our clients and Accenture and the rest of ourselves are conscientious of the intended and unintended consequences of some of the work that we're doing, and that we do our best efforts with that innovation to figure out how we deliver value to our clients and businesses, to Accenture, and to society more broadly. But the moment of leader who cares is, I remember when I had to sign off that that's what we're about, because the CEO at the time and C-suite of Accenture didn't ask me to set up a social innovation group.
Right.
Right. And so when you say, well, this is what we're about and this is our purpose, they thought, oh gosh, this sounds like it's are you only doing social things? And where we are now in the world of COVID, I think there's no question that what we've done is the right thing. But I just say, in terms of leader who cares in a moment, that maybe where I felt I earned something, or at least is because in some ways I felt I took a risk to declare that caring and making money can actually happen at the same time, and to, even though I wasn't asked to do it and it wasn't a separate thing on the side of a CSR project, it was, I didn't say our business needs to be that in the middle. And yeah, it's easier now, but it felt like a bit of a risk at the time, that I would have positioned ourselves as slightly marginal to the part that really makes money. You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. I've dealt with clients from the executive search standpoint about why aren't we getting the best people, why this and that, for years and years, and someone would always bring up, well, maybe we need to care about them more. And then someone with too much time on their hands would say, hey, they got a treadmill, what more do they need? Or something like that. Or or it was crazy. Or maybe we should care more about our employees. Let's give them one more sick day. Yay. That's like, but then I had clients like Ryder at their world headquarters, saw that they had a lot of young families working there. So they, long story short, they built a daycare center at headquarters, changed the whole perspective of who Ryder was and what the leaders cared about, and us able to represent them to get talent. But it's taken a long time to get to this point. And as you know,
Yeah.
Fifth Element, we try to create with our clients omni-wins, bringing people and leaders together for their expertise and resources, et cetera, for both economic and social impact now, because they realized knee bone's connected to the shin bone. Can you share with us, at the dock, what's the differentiation baked into the dock and the impact in the business model, allowing you to execute and get results economically and socially? And maybe you can give an example or two, something like that.
Sure. So, in the world of innovation, I'll start with the notion of product market fit, which that's not specific, obviously, to the dock, but it's a truth. At the end of the day, we're looking for something where those two things meet. Mm-hmm. Then there would also be ideas around what do you need to do to find those ideas that actually scale and become real. And one element is technology feasibility. And again, that's not unique to the dock, and a lot of places would look at that. Second is desirability from consumers. Is it something anyone actually wants? And actually, there is a jump there. There are some technologies that are created that are hammers looking for a nail. Do you know what I mean? So this notion of really understanding humans and consumers and understanding what they want. The third is commercial innovation. And this starts to get into your world. It's not always obvious how you're going to make money, or how you're going to monetize data, or how you're going to do X, Y, Z. And a lot of innovations actually are not mind-blowingly, amazing from a technology perspective. They're essentially commercial model innovations of new ways of transacting with clients. And the fourth and final area, which I think is, at the moment at least, relatively unique, at least from what we hear from our clients, is I call it the area of should we. So we have examples of innovations that are technically feasible, they're legal and you can make money, and there's probably some people that individually would buy it because it plays to their needs and maybe their vices, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But you can see in the clients, this doesn't feel right. Should we do this? I have access to this data from my customers. Should I use it in order to do X, Y, or Z? Or I know that I can automate an enormous amount of my team in a particular area. Should I do that? Like, there's a lot of these should we questions. And so part of our formula at the dock, and this is what I tell our clients, is I get really excited when we pass those 4 tests around the work that we do. That it's technically feasible and something new and novel. If people actually want it and there's a market there. Commercially, we've come up with an interesting way to deal with it. And we're tackling some of the should we questions in ways that are interesting. So maybe I'll give you, I can give you a few examples. The first one's actually in the pharma industry, which obviously has had a lot of pressure on it here during this COVID time frame. And so we've been working with a variety of pharmaceutical companies to improve the R&D process. And we have an overall mission to try to create twice the number of drugs in half the time. So that directly relates, obviously, there's, and what we're doing is working with Accenture to create a platform and a set of IP that we can use. It's AI driven to, for instance, in the front end drug discovery process, if you're trying to imagine, how do I possibly find a cure to this disease or a vaccine for XYZ, there's a huge process of scanning data, biological data and other sorts of data. So we've created an AI tool that we call Target ID now. That was not obvious that it would be possible because of the level of data and how complicated it was. But it's been really successful in being able to better identify targets for possible cures. And if we can improve that whole process, that will reduce the price of drugs. It'll make them come out cheaper and faster. And so there's a human health win. There's a win for Accenture as we create a platform that's able to do some of this stuff. And obviously for the pharmaceutical companies, there's a win. There's another area of that we call social commerce. Another thing that's come out of the pandemic at the moment are people are increasingly buying directly over the social media channels. Mm-hmm. So it's almost the next wave of e-commerce. And what's been interesting with this is the application of this has been particularly with small and medium-sized businesses. Because, for instance, in Africa, Facebook is the internet, more or less, right? Yep. And so one of the aspects about making a better world is there is a trend towards bigger companies being bigger, and particularly through the pandemic, a lot of small, medium-sized businesses struggling enormously trying to go through this pandemic. So we're working, yes, with some of the big tech players and some of those platforms in social world, but how can we feed the businesses and create more viable and better performing small and medium-sized businesses around the world to reinvigorate them as we come back out of pandemic, to get the transactions online without them being able to do all the maybe investment and so forth that bigger companies could do. So there's another win-win. It's a win, again, for Accenture for creating this. It's a win for those social media platforms, but it's equally, a real focus and passion is those SMBs around the world and getting them back on their feet after the pandemic. And maybe finally, we've created a platform for policing. And this is one that's fraught with the should we questions. Using AI to improve the performance of policing is an area of a lot of concern, but we've managed, again, through technical feasibility, et cetera, to come up with some use cases that we built on top of Amazon Web Services, AWS, a platform that we've piloted and gone live with a police force and have a pipeline of about 30 others standing ready. But for instance, one is about officer safety and predicting how to make officers more safe and looking for warning signs when we think that there could be an issue coming, is one of the use cases. But in doing so, I go back to the should we dimension. We used social psychologists, anthropologists, people from the humanities in the innovation process to engage the community, to think about this from the multiple perspectives of people of color, of a wide variety of diverse spectrum, to try to bring all that into the design process in order to create something that really does improve the policing for the benefit of the officers as well as the community and everyone in the community. And so it's been another area that we've been experimenting with. That's so some examples. That's win-wins that we're working on.
Yeah, those are pretty fascinating examples. In a way, so much more exciting, I would think, when you're bringing in that whole human aspect together with the commercialization aspect together, rather than let's build this product and sell the hell out of it and make a ton of money. As that's like your only purpose. And especially because we've realized again that the social impact translates to better for the business also in so many ways. So those are fascinating. And I guess along with that, my grandparents, one of my grandparents were from Kiev and they came over to Canada, etc. And I remember them always saying when I was a kid, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing. That was the thing. It wasn't a branding or a slogan. It was real life. And I want to get your opinion on, with all the stuff going on in technology, and the future of the work almost became the present of the work in so many aspects, and COVID and wildfires and everything else going on. Do you think there's been, quote unquote, an awakening of what's really important out there?
Yes, but maybe I'll say that. But I like the simplicity of your grandparents' wisdom there, and I think that's something people are being reminded of a little bit in the pandemic as well. I mean, the end of the day, health, then I think you mentioned education and just the notion that knowledge is power in that sense. There's some real basics to life. We can make life really, really complicated. But at the end of the day, I think the pandemic has been a little bit of a bringing things back to basics. And historically, we've seen, let's say World War II, there was equally a moment there.
Yep.
Right after World War II, there was whole ways of the world that, out of that hardship, it reminded people what is actually important in life. And it puts things back in perspectives. And off the back of that, more broadly, we got the Bretton Woods institutions, for instance, the IMF, the World Bank. We rethought the role of the state in terms of providing some level of social security and perhaps looking at other things. These moments in the world when there's mass hardships tend to also have an opportunity for us to make a leap forward in a few areas for the benefit of the broader society. And I think that's a little bit of the opportunity that we have now, to not go back to the normal, not reset. We don't want to, let's use this slight amount of, the way that we're seeing, the COVID pandemic payments. How far are those maybe from universal basic income, which may not be a completely great idea all the way, but we've just had an unintended consequence to some extent, or unintended action, some of that happening. What can we learn from it as we maybe reimagine the way things go forward? For businesses and corporate innovators, I think sustainability, particularly as it relates to the environment, is on the table much more than ever before. I can say that from my perspective in innovation at Accenture and the doc and the clients that we work with. Sustainability in the past has been this thing when a company has extra budget to some extent and kind of wanted to explore, a couple of, key areas. But now it is really, I mean, the resilience and sustainability of supply chains globally, climate action and serious climate action, particularly as I think a lot of the targets are getting closer, and then proclamations by the oil majors of being carbon neutral by 2050. There's a whole number of quite concrete proclamations and real challenges. That means, we've discussed with one of the big global banks, their commercial banking, how they can provide commercial finance for the massive amounts of change that's going to need to happen, for instance, in the agriculture sector.
Yep.
So there's a lot of opportunities in the whole, I'm excited to see what happens with the Ford F-150 in the US, the Lightning, the new electric one that's coming out soon. So it's those types of opportunities. That's the best selling car in the world. If that comes out and the people that typically drive Ford F-150s decide I'm going to switch, and it has greater torque and everything, allegedly, like that could be one of those tipping points where things like electric cars become quite the norm, and where we've been slowly bringing them up and charging points slowly coming. We could suddenly get an escalation in 5 years where this stuff really happens. So
how the world,
sorry,
how the
in
world,
the environmental space, and I think in inclusion diversity, I think that's also born out of the George Floyd stuff out of the US more recently that reawakened that during this pandemic time period, or what we've just saw with unfortunate some of the stuff with the English fans in the in the European Cup finals and some of the racism that came out there. I think as employers, it's definitely way back on the agenda about discussing, the status of people of color and other minorities, and to be more inclusive, to create more inclusive environments and to stand up for that. So I think that's another key one. And the final one I think that's interesting, particularly in your industry, is what they're calling the Great Resignation. I think this awakening is also an individual one for some people. I think there's a lot of people reevaluating whether or not they want to go back to the old grind they were doing before. And I think that's lovely. I mean, it's part of the broader story, of rejuvenation of the world and of our companies and of some individuals who choose to make a move to other companies.
Yeah, I would. You described it so amazingly, and I agree. I think people are. And I think people in Europe are ahead of people in America on this, to be honest with you. As when you ask someone, in Europe, what do they do? What's going on in their life? They don't start with their job usually. They start with their family. And in America, a lot of times you start with your job. This is what I do. And I think that is changing, that you can't actually care about the human aspects of what's going on, and not only the making money. Let me, and it's funny you talk about the Ford. I'll do this really quick. How life has changed, where from American graffiti, where you have to have the noisiest truck or motorcycle while you're smoking a cigarette, and now it's the quietest truck with no cigarette.
Yes.
Go figure. Hey, listen, what would you say you're most grateful for and most hopeful for after what's happened and what's going to happen?
I mean, I have to say what I'm most grateful for is my health and the health of my family. I think I'll go back to what you just mentioned earlier. I mean, at the end of the day, we've had to work through a global health crisis, and pandemic. This wasn't just working from home, as people say. This was us trying to survive and work through that. It's still not over, obviously, either with the Delta variant and everything, but hopefully slightly more under control than it was. So I have to be thankful for that, because I haven't had any issues in my family with COVID, and I know so many people have had big tragedies around the world. What I'm most hopeful for, this reawakening that we just talked about. I find myself having to much less justify the should we questions. It's not, as you were mentioning, there is maybe a traditional sense of, but we're here to make money, blah, 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 kind of this sort of feeling. I think that it's becoming increasingly easier to have some interesting discussions with what I call leaders in business, as opposed to business leaders. Mm-hmm. This is a Ryanism, but I had the moment of, I mentioned before that sometimes people wonder what automation can do to save the bottom line, improve profitability, and it includes a lot of redundancies and things like that in a company. And we may discuss some of those possibilities of where we would go and so forth. And then at lunch, I'll have these clients and people ask me what should my child study in order to be successful in the future. Mm-hmm. And I describe it like a switch. It's sometimes business leaders think when they're at work, their job is to abdicate nearly their moral compass to that of the corporation, and that they have no obligation to think about right and wrong, because they're there to make money. And as long as it's legal, it's the government's job to do the rest of it. A leader in business is someone who I think is in business, but they don't abdicate their moral compass to the fact that they're in business. They're a human. They're a member of a community. They're a father, daughter, friend, family, and so when they're at work, they do make decisions partially on, is this the right thing to do? Not just for the bottom line. And that's what I think is awakening a bit. This pandemic has awakened something in people where they're not shutting it off as often as they're at work, and having psychological effect. And so I'm excited for this moment in history. It's unfortunate we've had this pandemic, but yeah, I'm excited for what possibilities are opening up, where we can start to make some action at a more systemic and bigger level.
And that's why we're recognizing leaders who care, because you gotta, for all sorts of reasons, you gotta. I don't know if that's good English, you gotta, but that's what I said. Hey, listen, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on our Leaders Who Care channel. You definitely are a great fit. There's no doubt about it.
Well, thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure to be here and have a chat with you. Thank you very much.